Hey guys, welcome back to Creative Adventures. Today I am baking. It is officially November, Halloween is over, and that means it's time for fall flavors, and this is absolutely my favorite season. So Chris and I are going on our first ever couples vacation, just the two of us. This will be the first time ever that we've gone away to go do something for an entire week. We've been together for 5 years and we've taken lots of vacations in that time, but we always end up taking other people with us, our friends, our family, whoever. So we're really excited that we're gonna finally get a getaway, just the two of us, for an entire week. But it means we won't be having a big Thanksgiving celebration. So luckily, another one of our really good friends is hosting a Friendsgiving tonight. It is the first weekend of November, so it's a little early in the season, but I'm excited because we're gonna get to have turkey and, you know, do all the traditional Thanksgiving stuff with a bunch of friends and still get to go on our couple vacation, but not feel like we're missing out on the holidays. So I have been tagged to bring a dessert tonight. So I am making my absolute most favorite fall recipe, which is a brown butter pumpkin layer cake, and it has a brown butter, cream cheese, brown sugar frosting that goes on top, and the topping. The topping is what makes it. It is a candied ginger pecan and pepita topping that just gives this cake just like so much life and so much crunch. It's just divine. I found this recipe years ago in a magazine and I've kind of adapted it a little bit to work better for my needs. I've made this probably a million times. I've made it in different sizes, I've made it as cupcakes. I actually even made this as a wedding cake for another really good friend of mine. We did a cupcake tower for her wedding, and some of the cupcakes were also this flavor, but the top tier that the couple wanted was this flavor with the frosting. It didn't have the topping, but it did have the frosting. They actually just had their 1-year anniversary, and they asked me to make the same cake for them this time, and I made it with the topping, and they absolutely loved it. So it's 2:20 right now, looking at the clock behind the camera, and I have until about 6 o'clock to get this finished. So we better get moving. Let's get started. So first things first, before prepping all of my other ingredients, I want to go ahead and get my first batch of butter browned. This is the butter that's actually going to go in the cake itself. We're going to make another batch of browned butter afterwards that's going to be for the frosting. But I want to make this batch first because it needs to cool down for about 15 minutes before we actually put it into the cake batter. So I've got 3/4 of a cup of unsalted butter here, and about medium. You don't want it too high for this. And we're gonna let this melt down first, and if you've never browned butter before, your butter's gonna completely melt. It's gonna start to foam a little bit, and then as that foam starts to subside, the solids in the butter are actually going to kind of stick to the bottom and actually start toasting. So what we're gonna do is once that foaming really starts to subside, we're going to pretty much continually stir this butter, scraping those solids up off the bottom of the pot so that they don't get burnt. And then you just wanna let it get browned to a nice amber brown color. You don't want it to go too long where it turns black, because it will happen very quickly once it actually starts browning. But you don't want it to be too light of an amber color either. You're really looking for an amber brown color. All right, our butter is completely melted now, and it is just starting to foam up on top. You can see that white foam developing. It's gonna bubble quite a bit during this phase, and that's exactly what you want it to do. You just wanna stir it periodically while it's going through this foaming phase, and pretty quickly you'll start to see this color change, and you'll also notice a different smell. It's going to smell very nutty. It's definitely going to give off a very nutty aroma. Alright, it's only been about 1 minute since it started foaming, and our foam has completely subsided now. Now we're just boiling away. So you want to start stirring even more frequently now. Alright, our butter is just starting to take on a little bit of a darker color, and you can kind of see that it's getting almost like a clarified look to it. And that's because our solids are separating and they're starting to settle down to the bottom. So what you're seeing on the top is just the liquids. And this is the point where you really need to watch it, because it can start burning very quickly. All right, we're starting to brown now. The butter is taking on kind of a toasted golden color. You can probably see it when I move the foam out of the way. Now you can see it's getting even darker. Kind of looks like a nice good dark beer. And this stage is really that good amber color. I'm gonna let it go just a tad longer. Look how brown that's getting and how quickly that's happening. And the aroma is really coming off of it now too. And I do judge a lot by how it smells, but we're starting to get a really good color on that. All right, I'm gonna call that done. So I'm gonna turn my heat off. I have a little bowl over here to the side. Give it another good scrape on the bottom to get all those solids up. And I'm gonna carefully pour this into this little bowl. Now keep your pot out because we are gonna be making one more batch of browned butter for the frosting. We're gonna do that after we get the cake in the oven, but no need to put that away right now because we're gonna need it again. This needs to cool for about 15 minutes before we put it in our cake batter. So I'm just gonna set this off to the side for now and let it rest and go ahead and prep the rest of my ingredients, and then after this has been sitting for 15 minutes, then we can mix the two things together. So for the rest of this cake recipe, which by the way, I'll have the entire recipe printed on my blog and I will link to that in the description below. So for our dry ingredients, we've got all-purpose flour, some baking soda, some table salt, some cinnamon, cloves, and ginger. And for our wet ingredients, I've got both brown sugar and white sugar, an entire can of pumpkin, 2 eggs, and a little bit of buttermilk. So for our dry ingredients, we're just going to take all of our spices and our salt and our baking soda and add those to the flour. Make sure we get all of it. Give that a good whisk so everything is fully incorporated. And for our wet ingredients, we're gonna mix our pumpkin, eggs, and buttermilk into our sugars in a separate and slightly bigger bowl because this is going to be the bowl that we're gonna mix our flour into. So I got a rubber spatula just to get this pumpkin out of the can. Mix it right in. And this is just a hand mixed recipe. You do not need a mixer for this at all. I'm just going to use my whisk again to thoroughly incorporate all of these wet ingredients. You want to make sure that you don't have any big lumps of sugar, specifically that brown sugar. But overall your mixture will be a little bit lumpy. You just don't want any big, big clumps of sugar sticking together. All right, I've moved all my trash out of the way and I brought over my butter. Next, we're going to take our flour and spice mixture with our baking soda and salt and a spatula, and we're just going to very gently fold our dry ingredients into our wet until that's completely incorporated. Be sure you get all those flour bits off the bottom of the bowl as well. And then finally, we're going to very gently whisk in our browned butter. Now for the cake part, you do want to get all of those solids in there as well because they have a lot of flavor in them. From my experience, this is going to look a little weird at first. It's going to be separated and it's going to look a little almost curdled at first. That's completely normal. But as you keep gently whisking, it will combine with your batter and turn completely smooth like you would expect out of any cake batter. Oh my gosh, this smells so good. Browned butter is one of my absolute most favorite flavors. I regularly make a side dish of nothing but rice with browned butter and pecans mixed in. I make the brown butter and then I put some chopped pecans in the brown butter and let them toast for about a minute, and then pour that over just some brown rice and, you know, let all of that good brown butter mix in or coat the rice, and it's just delicious. All right. Our brown butter is completely mixed in, and as you can see, that totally smoothed out and looks like a normal cake batter. Oh, it smells so good. Let me get my other bowl out of the way. Now, for cake pans, this recipe is actually designed for 9-inch pans, for short 9-inch pans. You would use 2 of them. I'm actually going to be making it today in 8-inch pans because I want my layers just a little bit taller. I do use deep pans. These are 3-inch side pans because I do a lot of baking, obviously, for my cake decorating business. You do not need to have 3-inch side pans. 2-inch are fine for this. Sometimes I do also make this as a tall cake with 6-inch layers. In that case, if you're only going to bake them in 2, you definitely do want the 3-inch side pans, or you can use 3 6-inch layers in the shorter pans. The shorter pans are just the normal ones you would find at any department store or grocery store sometimes, but these I special ordered because I do a lot of baking and I like a lot of tall cakes. This is just baking release spray. This particular brand is Pam. You can get, there's like one that's called Baker's as well. I'm only using this because I have it on hand and I'm trying to use it up. This stuff works fantastic. I don't even use parchment in my pans and I don't have any problem removing my cakes. However, you can also make a mixture of equal parts of flour, vegetable oil, and shortening, and it kind of makes a paste, a really creamy paste that you use a pastry brush to just brush your pans with. It's the same exact stuff as this, just not in a spray form. You put it in an airtight container and stick it in the fridge, and that stuff will last 6 months. So it's a lot cheaper than buying this. So as soon as I run out of this, I'm going to be doing that from now on. But I still have some of this. It works really, really well. So this is what I'm going to use today. Just give your pans a good spray, including the sides. And you can see that this is different from regular spray oil because this actually does have flour in it. This is specifically made for baking so that it will release your baked goods from the pan. So if you don't want to make a whole batch of release paste for yourself, if you don't bake enough to need it, this is definitely a good thing to use in a pinch. I love this stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to evenly divide my batter between my 2 pans. Nothing fancy here. I'm going to smooth it out best I can. And I'm just going to give it a good tap. Sorry if that's loud. And we're going to pop these in a preheated oven, preheated to 350. They'll take about 30 minutes for each one of them to bake. Obviously every oven's different, but I believe mine will take about 30 minutes. So while these are cooking, we're going to go ahead and make our next batch of brown butter, and we're also going to go ahead and make our topping for the cake so that it can be nice and cool when the whole thing's frosted later. Alright, so while we've been waiting for our cakes to cook, they're still in the oven, I went ahead and made my second batch of browned butter. This one we actually don't want the solids to stay mixed in because this is actually going in our frosting and that would really, really discolor our frosting. So we're going to actually let the solids have already kind of sank to the bottom. So I'm going to pop this in the fridge and we're just going to leave this in the fridge until we're ready to make our frosting later. And then we will be able to scrape off the clarified browned butter at the top while leaving the solids in the bottom of the bowl, and then we'll use that for our frosting. So I'm going to pop this in the fridge. Now in this saucepan I have 2 tablespoons of butter, and we're going to put this on medium heat. And we're going to let the butter melt, and then we're going to add some pecans and pepitas. Pepitas are pumpkin seeds, and we're going to be using raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds for this. Alright, our butter's melted, so we're going to add our pumpkin seeds. And these are just halved pecans. I have not chopped these up. We'll just get these nice and coated in our butter. And we're just gonna let those sit to toast. Now what you're looking for is a sound, actually. Your pepitas are actually gonna start popping, and they'll pop pretty loud. You should be able to hear it on camera. So as soon as those start popping, then we're gonna add some brown sugar into this and let it get nice and coated, and then finally some crystallized ginger. It'll take about 2 minutes for those pepitas to start popping. Hear that? Oh, we're just starting to pop now. Alright, I've gotten a couple of good pops out of my pepitas, so now I'm going to sprinkle in 2 tablespoons or 1/8 of a cup of brown sugar. And that's really not a sprinkle, that's kind of a pop, huh? And just a tad bit of salt, about 1/4 teaspoon. And let's get that brown sugar all mixed in. We're gonna let this cook for about another 2 minutes for that brown sugar to completely dissolve and coat our pepitas and pecans and really just glaze them. Alright, our brown sugar looks completely melted, so we're gonna turn off the heat. And the final thing I'm gonna add in is crystallized ginger. Sometimes you can find this in the candy aisle, or sometimes you can find it in produce. My grocery store actually carries it in the produce department. So I've got about 2 tablespoons of crystallized ginger that I've chopped up pretty fine. I wouldn't call it minced, but it's a pretty small chop. And we're just gonna stir that in. And that's it. That is our topping for our cake. So I'm going to transfer this to a separate bowl, and we're just going to let this cool down at room temperature until it's completely cool, and whenever we frost our cake, it won't risk melting our frosting. So we're just gonna set this to the side until we're ready to finish our cake. We're ready to make our browned butter cream cheese frosting. So the first thing is I got my browned butter out of the refrigerator, and as you can see, it's completely set up. I can turn this upside down. And the solids are on the bottom of the bowl, and then we've got just the browned butter left, the clarified butter on top. So what we want to do is we want to scrape all of this out of the bowl without scraping into those solids and get that into our mixer. We've also got our cream cheese going in the bowl. This is still cool. It is softened, but it is not room temperature, so it probably sat out maybe like 10 or 15 minutes. It's soft enough that it will mix really easily, but you don't want it to be super warm because this is already a pretty soft icing. And in addition to our cream cheese and browned butter, we are adding some brown sugar. This will give our icing a nice rich molassesy flavor. And with that, we are going to mix this with our paddle on the lowest speed just until that sugar is completely mixed in and dissolved. And I said low speed, but I actually am going to put this up on about medium. And now I'm actually going to swap to my whisk attachment because I've got some clumps of sugar in there that I want to make sure I get out. Give a bowl scrape. Alright, that's what we got so far. That is our cream cheese, browned butter, and brown sugar nicely mixed together, and all that sugar's dissolved into our butter and cream cheese. So last thing is we're just going to add 2 cups of confectioner sugar and whip it until it's a nice fluffy icing. Alright, our sugar's in. I think I actually am just going to stick with my whisk attachment this time. I don't usually use it, but I'm going to see if I can get a little bit fluffier of an icing with it. I'll start that on low, otherwise powdered sugar is going to go poof everywhere. Then you get a big mess. All right, I think we're probably good. So, here's what we got. A nice creamy off-white frosting. Oh my god, it's so good. So good. It's got that nutty flavor from the brown butter, and it's got a molasses flavor from the brown sugar, and it's got a tang from the cream cheese. It's just a really good combination. All right, so let's move back over to my little island and get my turntable out, and we'll get started putting this together. Okay, as you can see, I've already got my first cake layer on a cake circle. I did use a bigger cake circle than the cake this time, since this is just going to a friend's house with me tonight. My box is a 10-inch box. This is an 8-inch cake, but to keep it from sliding around in the box, I'm using a 10-inch circle. Also, if this were a presentation cake, I would normally go ahead and level off the top as much as possible, but these cakes are actually pretty flat. There's not a whole lot of leveling that needs to happen anyway, and this is kind of a rustic cake anyhow, so I'm actually not going to level these. I'm just going to go ahead and fill them, fill this, put the next layer on top, and then we will ice the cake. So I'm just going to get a big dollop of frosting and plop it right on top, and using a big offset spatula, just spread it around pretty evenly. Nothing fancy here. I just want a good, nice, even layer throughout the cake. Easy peasy. And we're gonna put our next layer just right on top. Make sure it's centered. And then I like to push down and flatten it out even more, especially when I'm not actually leveling the cake. This helps to give me a nice level surface. Just kind of spin it around and make sure we're pretty even as possible, considering we're not trimming this at all. And voila, that's it. So I would also normally crumb coat my cakes. I'm actually not gonna do that with this cake either. I'm just gonna frost it and use a smaller offset spatula to just kind of put a very simple design in the side, and then I'm gonna call it a day. We're gonna be putting so much topping on top of this cake that you're not gonna know if there's crumbs in there anyway, so I don't really think it's necessary for this one. One word of caution about this frosting. This frosting is not meant to be piped. As you can see, I mean, it's a pretty thin icing. It's just fallen off of my spatula. You're not gonna be able to do very intricate designs with this with a piping tip or anything. You could probably turn this into a crusting icing that you could use for piping by either adding or replacing some of the butter with shortening, and then also adding significantly more sugar, powdered sugar, not the brown sugar, but the confectioner's sugar. It is going to taste different if you do that. I've actually never made it that way just because I feel like it would take too much away from the flavor of this frosting to do that. Even when I made this as a wedding cake, we ended up doing it as a naked cake for the top tier because I just didn't feel like it would do the cake service to change the flavor of the frosting that much. So if you try it, let me know. I'd love to know how it actually does turn out. It's definitely possible. It's definitely doable. Just not sure I want to take that one on. So I'm going to go ahead and just plop on the rest of my frosting. Use my offset spatula. Just spread that around. It's actually going to spread off the sides. It's perfectly fine. So I'm just trying to make sure I have a nice thick layer of icing all the way around. like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect for this cake. I'm not trying to sell this one. But I want to have a nice thick layer. Well, number one, because it's delicious. And number two, because I want to do just a very simple pattern in the side with my smaller offset spatula. I'd say that's good enough. So I'm going to take my smaller offset spatula and I'm just going to basically tap the edge to the edge of the cake and then just spin it. I'm going to start at the bottom though. So I'm holding my spatula completely still, but I'm spinning the cake. There we go. Now we have just like a really nice, really simple ruffle design. Now just to clean up my top edge just a smidge, I'm going to use my bench scraper to just pull that top edge in. Out a little bit. Now, wipe the spatula off, and I can hold it against the edge of my cake board and scrape away the excess to clean up the bottom edge. And then I got a nice clean cake board. Alright, the final touch is to add our topping. Now I will say, as this cools, it will get kind of stuck together. So I just use a fork to kind of break it into smaller chunks. Chunks are okay. Oh, I also wanted to say, if you want to put some of this topping in the middle of your cake, if you know you like it and you want to put it in your layer, you can absolutely do that too. A lot of times I choose not to if there are people that I don't know that are going to be eating it, because not everybody likes having a crunchy something or other in the middle of their cake. So I like to just put it on top personally, and that way if they don't like it, they can just not eat that part. It's not like in the cake. All right, got that broken up. So we're just going to pile this on top. See what I meant about the top not having to be perfect? This is why. Because you don't see it anyway. Isn't that beautiful? There is our finished cake. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you try and enjoy the recipe as well, because it is a delicious one. I will have the full recipe on my blog, rachelscreativeadventures.com, and I will link that down in this description below. As always, if you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave me a comment, because I would love to hear from you. And if you like this video, please give me the thumbs up, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching. See you next time.